What's up, guys? So, I had a good conversation about the riots and the looting yesterday with my dad after he got into a argument with my sister about it. And I wanted to share one thing that I thought about during that argument. And this is really directed towards those people who are having such a big problem with the riots. And I want to start by saying, yes, I mean, I do agree that much of what's going on with the looting and stuff, a lot of that, there's sin. There's injustices being perpetrated by some of these rioters, by some of these looters. However, a problem arises when people, they may have said, oh man, it sucks what happened to George Floyd. But when it comes to the rioting, they're just so outraged. They're outraged at the looting. There was one guy I follow on Twitter. I listen to his podcast a lot. He had made about 10 different posts condemning all the rioting and looting. And I only saw two posts from him that even mentioned George Floyd. One of them, he was saddened by his death, but in neither of them did he really express any outrage over the killing of George Floyd. So here's an analogy I want to make, and I want to compare this situation to something else to kind of help us see how we should see this. Imagine there's a concentration camp. Let's say it's Auschwitz. Let's say at Auschwitz, the Jewish people, just fictionally speaking here, had an uprising, and they revolted. And in their revolt, in the Jewish people in the Holocaust at Auschwitz, some of them, even maybe a large amount of the Jews who were revolting against the Nazis at Auschwitz, did not just use as enough force to get their freedom, but some of them killed the innocent children of these Nazis, right? Maybe some of the Jews did it because their innocent child was killed by a Nazi. And so then in their uprising, in the revolt from Auschwitz, you see one of these Jewish people take, an innocent 2-year-old child of a Nazi who was there at the concentration camp, and they slit that baby's throat. Okay, now if that's the scene that we see, and our response to the whole thing that happened with the Holocaust and with Auschwitz and with everything that happened to the Jews, and you saw that officer kill that Jew's kid, and then, as the uprising happens, you see that Jew who had this kid killed, kill that officer's kid. What should our response be? Should we say, oh, that was completely fine for that Jew to kill that innocent young child of a Nazi? No, we shouldn't say that. We should say, dang it, come on. That was wrong. Why'd you do that? Come on. But looming larger than the fact that the Jew killed the innocent child is the Holocaust. If you're watching a movie about the Holocaust and you're seeing everything that's happening to these Jews in the concentration camp, and now there's an uprising, okay? And in their uprising, some of them do some bad stuff. If you're primarily outraged about what the Jews are doing, that's not the appropriate response. It's not. Yeah, you say, man, I understand why they're lashing out, why they're doing some evil here. I wish they wouldn't, and they're culpable for that. They'll stand before God on Judgment Day for killing that innocent Nazi's child. But you understand where it's coming from. And yeah, you might condemn that. But much larger than that, looming much larger than that, is the whole issue with the Holocaust and the Auschwitz camp. And this isn't a terrible analogy. Usually when you bring up Nazis, it's a terrible analogy. Is comparing what happened with black people in this country with slavery really different than the Holocaust? Maybe the Holocaust was a little bit more extreme. And here you're saying, oh, way more extreme? No, I mean, gassing people to death. The slaves were brutally tortured to death oftentimes. And this wasn't just for 10 years. This was for hundreds of years. that this happened to the black people in this country. It's not like once slavery was abolished, all of a sudden everyone just loved black people and treated them equally. You have legal protections go into place, but you can't put laws over people's hearts and minds. People are still not getting jobs because they're black. You can't prove that somebody didn't hire you because you're black if they don't tell anybody that that was their reason for doing it. When it comes to police brutality, what happened to George Floyd, this has been happening over and over and over again, and we're only just now seeing it because we only now have smartphones. But this is something black people have been living with, a reality they've been living with, that the white people are always denying. And the only time white people have ever said, yeah, it was an injustice, is when it's so clearly wrong that they just could not possibly deny it. But in any other case, if there's any reason to say, well, it was kind of the black person's fault, maybe they just should have obeyed, then you completely deny that there was any race involved. And so this is the situation that's going on with black people in this country. Now, is there some injustice going on with some of this looting and this rioting? Yes. And that should sadden us. That should grieve us. Those are wrongs being done. But if your response to that injustice is more outrage, if you're tweeting 10 times more about the looting than you are about George Floyd, if you are expressing more frustration about the looting than you are about the death of George Floyd, then you don't get it. You might say you're against racism. Everyone condemns what happened to George Floyd. But guess what? Your response shows that you aren't aware of this dark cloud, this big dark cloud that's looming, this history, this reality in present day of injustice in which these riots and lootings are for the most part in response to. Just like with a Jewish uprising in Auschwitz, if you saw that on a movie, if you saw that happened, you would be grieved by some of the stuff the Jews did, but you wouldn't be more outraged by what the Jews did in their uprising than what the Nazis did to them. You wouldn't. So I don't personally support the looting, but if my response was more outrage about the looting, even if there's outrage at all, I mean, yes, it's wrong. It shouldn't be happening. But what is far more outrageous, what should really be capturing our hearts and our minds, is what has brought the looting about. What is this big dark cloud hanging over the situation?